Africa is an enormous area of the world. It is one of the 7 continents, not to be confused with an independent country. Africa's, we'll go old school pointer here, Africa's landmass takes up 20% of the Earth's landmass. It is rich and diverse in culture, in language, in religion, in just about everything possible. Landscape, geography, from lush rainforests to dramatic deserts to fertile plains like Simba and Nala running over here in the Serengeti Plain in Tanzania. And when you hear about Africa, one of the things that people like to talk about, especially in world history when dealing with migration, you hear the term the Great Bantu Migration. That is false. There is not one singular Bantu migration, but a series of migrations over about 1,000 years, starting here in kind of like the rib cage of Africa, coming over and working their way south. As the Bantu speakers, like Latin is the root for what languages? Romance languages, which are?
English, French, Spanish,
English, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. Well, Bantu is the root of many African languages. As the Bantus move southward through Africa, they're going to absorb and assimilate and push other people in front of them, slowly assimilating them like the Borg from the old Star Trek days. The other dialect on the east coast of Africa is the Swahili dialect, like Asante Sana, things of that nature, will move through this area. Those are the 2 big root languages in Africa. The Bantu's root languages also goes with a migration of people over 1,000 years. So without my clicker annoyingly, I will do this. So here is a map of the spread of the Bantu languages, starting over here in what is today like Gabon, and coming downward. In this yellow area, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, part of Mozambique is where Swahili is spoken. So that is the start there. Now when it comes to civilization, do we need to go over Egypt at all? Okay, great. Pharaohs, pyramids, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom.
Things like the leaders, just like real quickly, like.
Famous big-time leaders. I think you would have Ramses, famous for being Moses' half-brother in the 10 plagues, but seen as a very good, long-lived Egyptian pharaoh. Hatshepsut, the first woman, who also created the first really well-known peace treaty and trading empires with the interior of Africa. And there's always King Tut, because he is famous. He's just a minor pharaoh, but his is the only tomb that we have ever found completely and totally intact. Little bit down from Egypt, on the east coast, is the kingdom of Axum. All right? If you don't know, you can always Axum. Ask them a question. And it is in East Africa, right here on the Red Sea, right by Saudi Arabia, made up of much of present-day Ethiopia. And it is a key trade area because due to its proximity in Africa to the Middle East and Asia, it is that trading port where the Trans-Sahara gold and salt route will come across Africa and they can ship goods over into the Middle East. Around the 300s, 350, Axum will convert to Christianity. And when Islam spreads beyond the heartlands, it kind of goes around and doesn't really mess with the kingdom of Axum so much because of the trading reliance. Because they were Christians, but it was seen as okay because they were a facilitator of trade. And they exported exotic African goods like elephant tusks, ivory, but also gold and salt. We know a lot about Axum from other civilizations that wrote about them. And so we know they were a powerful empire for 500-600 years, mostly because of evidence we get from other people. 4 or 5 different people say the same thing, then we think, well, hey, that's probably true. So Christianity is big, the trading center is big. What else makes them powerful is some of the trade and technology they're going to come up with in a minute. But their most famous king is King Ezana, and he will be a conqueror. He will assimilate the kingdom of Nubia that's mentioned in ancient Egypt and even in the Bible. He is the guy that converts to Christianity. And one of the things he does is he has his men carve churches out of the mountainside. So this church you can see carved in the shape of a cross in this rectangle. Well, this entire rectangle used to be part of the mountain. They cleared out the rubble and carved this church. And you go downstairs and you go inside, and many of them are still, well, they are all still there today, which is interesting in this very Islamic, heavily influenced area. He also begins to coin and stamp his own money and says, everybody trading with me has got to use money. We've got to use cash. So that there is King Ezana. Achievements of the empire are, they created a lot of pillars, like an Egyptian obelisk called a stele. Now you may remember good old Shutruk-Nehunte, who was the Mesopotamian conqueror who nobody remembers, that he took the stele of Narum's son and brought it back to his kingdom as an offering to his god. Well, a stele is like a totem pole or an obelisk. It's what borders your empire, or what you write and chronicle your information on. Also, here's a little bit of synthesis. Living in the hot area of modern-day Ethiopia, the kingdom of Axum began terraced farming to carve fields in the steep, dry, mountainous area. Can everybody see that? Should I shut out a set of lights? All right.
Well, could you turn them back on after?
Sure. All right. If you guys, I'll just turn them on and off
I don't want to fall.
as needed. Well, you sit underneath that one then. So anyway, you know how on American coins we have "In God We Trust" and "E Pluribus Unum." Well, King Ezana put on his coins, "May the country be ever satisfied." He wanted everybody in his empire to be happy. A lot of monumental architecture still remains because of the dry, arid climate. It hasn't rotted. So that is Axum. All right, Axum is going to fall similar to the Mayas and ancient Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro for reasons we are really not sure. They moved away from the seacoast and moved to the interior. We're not really sure. Maybe it was they ran out of resources. Maybe other empires were putting pressure on them. But shortly after they move inside, they kind of lose their power. They're never officially conquered, but by 630, right in the heart of the dark ages of Western Europe, they're pretty much impotent. They've got nothing left. So a great long-lasting civilization all the way through up until the modern day, but I don't know who that is, so we're just going to pretend that nobody's calling. All right, so Axum loses much of its power, so hopefully that's nobody trying to get hold of me for anything important. This area is known for a long time, from coming over here to Axum, all the way across the Sahara Desert to what we will know as Timbuktu in Ghana, Songhai in Mali, because of the great Trans-Sahara trade route. Trans-Sahara, along with the Silk Road, the Columbian Exchange, and the Indian Spice Road, is one of the great trade routes in world history. connecting the Atlantic Ocean in West Africa, eventually through Saudi Arabia, all the way over to China. Eventually the Silk Road and the Trans-Sahara trade route will meld into one. Key important things that are traded on the Trans-Sahara trade route. Number one is gold, and overtaking gold shortly thereafter is salt. Gold and salt. Also slaves will move over as well. The West African empires, Ghana, Songhai, Mali, even Senegambia, is going to master the Trans-Sahara trade route, moving equipment across the desert. Now, along with any good trade route, you need vehicles to move your cargo. So we know Zhang He used his massive fleet. The Arab sailors had the dhow, the Chinese had the junk, the Spanish had their galleon. What did the Africans use to transport their goods along the Trans-Sahara trade route? Camels. All right, they used camels. These ships of the desert, being able to endure the heat and carry heavy loads, camels are the main mover and shaker of goods and equipment on the Trans-Sahara trade route. Alexander, how are you doing?
All good.
All right, excellent. Right here is the picture of raw slabs of salt. So when I tell you that salt was worth its weight in gold, well, it wasn't in like a Morton's, salt shaker, all right? It was in a giant rock slab. And salt is very important because it was the ancient world's refrigerator, and it prevented you from being dehydration. So West and North Africa, going back to ancient Rome, salting the city of Carthage, it has been a very important trade product in this area of the world. You guys good? Okay, great. Moving from West Africa, or from the Trans-Sahara trade route, we get into this area, the shoulder socket of West Africa. A lot of things are going to happen here. First and foremost, it is where the West African kingdoms are going to grow, starting with Ghana. Ghana is the bedrock, the foundational West African empire on which every other thing is going to be built. If you want synthesis for this, the Olmecs in Mexico are going to form the bedrock foundation for the Mayas and the Aztecs and Teotihuacan. You could, if you were really clever and creative, like we were talking about at lunch today, they are the bedrock West African empire, like Judaism is the bedrock monotheistic religion with Christianity and then Islam layered on top. So Ghana, Songhai, and Mali. So there's a little bit of synthesis for you. Somebody did leave me a message. Okay. Ghana grows to power in this area. They were able to grow extremely wealthy because they controlled the trade routes from West Africa going across. And their empire is going to last a significantly long time. It's going to start around, 300. Way back in the time, the transition of like Greece and Rome. But it's going to hit its high point around 800. The exact same time that Charlemagne is elected was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Holy Roman Empire, in the exact same time the Mayan civilization will start. And it will last through much of the European Dark Ages. And Ghana is situated on the bend of the Great Niger River, a river valley with good soil that is able to grow very lush, powerful crops. Good, good, good. All right. Eventually, this is during the birth and the spread of Islam. Islam is going to come over and it is going to have an enormous influence on Ghana, especially with the merchants. Arabic traders come over and meet African ones, Bedouins. And there's nothing better to conduct business than changing your religion. So Islamic merchants come in, they're encouraged to settle down, to live in settlements, and many eventually become advisors to the great kings of Ghana. Ghana and their royal authority is different than everybody else throughout the world in two ways. Number one, the king had, or the people had a lot of direct access to their king. So he would literally sit in a chair, in a throne, and his people would come to him and solve disputes. In most other countries, you never got to see your king. There were barriers and they were buffers, and the king was far off. Well, the lowliest person in Ghana could get an audience with the king. He was seen as blessed by the gods to help out his people. That's difference number one. Difference number two is the transition of power. When the king of Ghana died, his son didn't replace him. It was the oldest son of his closest female relative, sister, cousin, aunt. So leadership was matrilineally defined rather than father to son. It went through the closest female relative. Why? Because they thought that was the thing to do. Around 1050, a group of Moroccans will come down, Muslim invaders from North Africa, and they will conquer the great Ghanaian civilization. They weren't able to dominate the region entirely, but they weakened Ghana enough that it fell from power. Building right off of Ghana is the next great West African kingdom known as Mali. And Mali will exist at a key moment in time. It's right in the heart of the Renaissance in Europe. It also exists right at the time of the great Mesoamerican Empire of the Aztecs and the South American Empire of the Incas. So they are powerful empires right at the same time. Near the tail end of Mali comes in the European age of exploration with Prince Henry the Navigator migrating down into Malian territory. Mali was a part of the former Ghanaian Empire, and what makes them interesting is they lived in small city-states, much like the ancient Greek city-states of Greece or the Mayan city-states in Mexico. Even like the city-states of the great Zimbabwe down in the southern part of Africa, all of these areas looked relatively the same. And Mali becomes very, very, very powerful. They are the first ones to go out and conquer their neighboring rival tribesmen and turn them into slaves. Mali begins to grow sugarcane. All right, Cameron, are you and I going to go to the sugarcane field? No, we are not. We're going to find somebody to do that hard, heavy-labored, laborious job for us. So we will make them go and do that. The other reason Mali is famous American author, University of Chicago professor Alex Haley traced his ancestral roots back to Kunta Kinte, a slave brought to the Americas that was a prince of Mali that was caught by Portuguese slave traders. Mali also begins to build one of the great cultural cities of the ancient world, Timbuktu. If Alexander falls asleep today, I will call his mom and she will knock him all the way to Timbuktu. Timbuktu becomes a trading center, but eventually under Mali and Songhai, it becomes like the ancient Athens or Alexandria of the African world. Scholars, linguists, everybody came to Timbuktu to study at this great city, a cosmopolitan city of trading and learning. So it was like a New York or an Istanbul, but set in West Africa. And Mali is ruled by kings known as Mansas. The Mansa was the ruler. The most famous of all of these Mansas is Mansa Musa, who will come to power in 1312. He will reign for a fairly long time, 25 years. And what he is known for is bringing over Islamic scholars. And he wanted to establish a kingdom of truth and justice while spreading the borders of his empire, militaristically if necessary. And he wants to base his peaceful kingdom and system of justice basically on the Quran. The one exception is he wanted to retain some traditional African ways of doing things. So African women did not have to wear traditional Islamic dress because they've never had to do that in their entire life. And what makes Mansa Musa so extremely famous, he is the guy that went on the Great Hajj, the fifth pillar of Islam, where he journeys from Timbuktu. He goes across West Africa, practicing the tithe, handing out gold and money and building schools and building hotels. Hands out so much money in Cairo that he causes massive inflation in Cairo for an entire decade. The procession he takes is enormous. 60,000 people. That is almost the population of our town with students. It's about the number of people who appeared on Franklin Street after the UNC win. 12,000 of them were slaves, and he had golden camels and bags of gold and exotic animals. It is the scene from Aladdin moving into Aqaba in the Disney classic. So, anyway, Mansa Musa will come. He will go on his Hajj. The one negative that Mansa Musa does is, rumor had it that there was a dude so rich down in Africa that he's got so much gold he just gives it away. And the Europeans, who had forgotten about Africa for hundreds of years, get Africa back on their radar so we can go and get some gold. That's about to have tragic consequences for the continent of Africa. By the 1400s, Mansa Musa is one of those great Jedi leaders that once they die, their descendants don't have their power, they don't have their personality, and they are not able to match the power of Mansa Musa, and the kingdom will splinter into various pieces. But it doesn't stay that way for very long, because growing out of the ashes of Mali will be Songhai. And a couple other big-time Malian kings to talk about. I forgot about King Sundiata here. He is a guy that will bring in irrigation canals and different types of food via the Muslims, who will lead to a massive population boom. This used to be a brilliant city. Today it is kind of caught in a famine and a drought, and it is this brown sandstone. So I already told you about some of this. The guys work on plantation like slavery, and it is Mali who will begin to work with the Portuguese in the slave trade. We ready? Yeah. Yes, we are. Okay. What the Portuguese would begin to do is they would have a fort like this one right here, built right on the edge so their ships could pull up at this dockwork, this port. The slaves were put down in the basement. They would open a door and scream and yell, fire guns or get dogs. The slaves would run along the bottom down into this trench looking for some place to go. And doors were open and they ran into the hold of a middle passage slave ship. The door was shut and away they went. Not too many of these Portuguese structure in Mali left. Many of them were destroyed as they kind of wanted to erase that dark part of their history, but a few actually do remain. Yes, ma'am. Growing Following next is the Empire of Songhai. And Songhai is governed by the great king Sunni Ali. And they are a full-blown imperial power. What is an imperial power? What is that? We talked about a little bit at lunch today.
Like they expand.
They expand, and you do it with your military. You go out and you come on back in, Mia. You conquer some folks. Oh, it's Raquel. One of the things that makes Mali so powerful is they get a set of river barges. They have like an actual navy and a horse-drawn cavalry. So you're a sugarcane farmer in West Africa. You're out like cutting your sugarcane or hoeing your field, and all of a sudden some dude comes flying out of the river on a horse, and you've got your shovel or your rake or your gardening hoe there. What are you going to do? Like, I'm good. Like, I'm good. Like, what do you want? Like, I'm just growing some sugarcane here. And they're able to dominate by using the Senegal and the great Niger rivers. Sunni Ali is going to die in 1492. What other world historical event happens in 1492? Columbus gets lost, sails the ocean blue. James, you just pierced it. Excellent. All right. He is succeeded by a guy named Askia Muhammad al-Tari. And Sunni Ali and some of his merchants converted to Islam, but they only seemed to do it when there were a lot of Muslims in the area. They still worship the traditional African gods and goddesses. Sunni Ali, however, is succeeded by Askia Muhammad al-Tari, and he is a zealous, passionate Muslim. And the thing that he wants to do is equal Mansa Musa. All right, everyone talks about how cool and how great Mansa Musa was, so I want to do the same thing. And he goes overboard. He invites Muslims to come over. He brings over architects. He even forces his own people out of their houses and their territory so he can give them to the Muslims. But no matter what he does, he is never fully able to, I'm going to create a word here, Islamize his empire to his own expectations. I just went Sarah Palin on it. It was never enough. He could always do more. So he was never content with what he had done. And Songhai is not as big as Ghana or Mali, but very, very powerful in between the Senegal and Gambia rivers. Question, Alexander?
No, we're just killing.
All right, there we go. And so Senegambia is going to be this area. If you come down from Portugal, it is on the coastline. It is in proximity to Portugal. So when Henry and the Navigator and his fellows get braver and braver and braver, this is the area that they come into. And it is the first area affected by the African slave trade in the late 13, early 1400s. So people on the coast will move inland and capture rival Africans and bring them to the coastline. When talking about the slave trade, everyone is so politically correct, they are afraid to say that Africans participated in the slave trade. Europeans could not go this far inland in Africa. One, they didn't know what was there. There were a lot of scary animals, and Europeans happened to be highly susceptible to malaria. So it's much easier. I'll hire you to go in and grab me some dudes and bring them out. I'll give you gold. Heck, I can give you salt. Eventually, I'll give you a little bit of wine and tobacco, and you'll do whatever I need to. So, Senegambia. Oh, and the European countries begin to name the coasts: the Gold Coast, the Ivory Coast, the Pepper Coast, from the commodity, from the trade good that they ripped away from West Africa. Oh. Now eventually we're going to run out of slaves in West Africa, and the Portuguese are going to move farther southward to the great country and kingdom of the Congo. At this time it's spelled with a K and not a C. And the Portuguese come to the Congo looking for gold. But unlike West Africa, it's not prevalent. So they start looking around and they say, hey, and this is a big river. It's got hundreds of tributaries. And the Portuguese began making arrangements to capture slaves from there. Slavery has now become big business. Gold brought the Europeans to Africa, but the slave trade brings them back for centuries. The Portuguese will give chieftains nice clothes, jewelry, metal goods, but mainly tobacco and alcohol. I'll give you this if you let me take some of your own people. Or if you go to a village down the river and capture them, we will buy them from you. One of the great kings of Congo, young Afonso I, was educated by Portuguese missionaries. And he tries to halt this practice. And he writes a letter as a Christian king to the king of Portugal, another Christian king. And he says, dude, we're both Christians. We're both kings. Why are you doing this? You've got to stop doing this to my people. And the Portuguese king said, well, I would, but I'm making a whole lot of money. It's just really hard to stop. So he doesn't. Missionaries come, and they go down there with the intention of stopping the slave trade, but they see how much money can be made. They just simply join in. The Portuguese try to assassinate King Afonso. The people get angry and call for a boycott on foreign goods. It's very similar, here's your synthesis, to the Chinese in the late early 1900s protesting about foreign domination of goods, like the Taiping and the Boxer rebellions. Why are you coming in here messing with us? Just leave us alone. Well, they try and assassinate King Afonso. He begins the boycott, and eventually he's able to restrict the Portuguese to one port called, what is it? Point Dracar, or whatever black is in French or Portuguese. What is it? I don't know, but anyway. Negro, Pont Negro. Isn't that black?
Yeah.
All right, it is. Right off the, well, you know what I mean, guys. This is on YouTube. I'm giving it the Portuguese. It's why everyone should speak American. That way there's no confusion over what you are actually saying. Hear that, YouTube world? Speak American. The world will be better. All right, here we go. All right, so whatever. Verde's green, whatever. Doesn't matter. So anyhow, here is all that remains of the Portuguese fort at the end of the Congo River. But in its heyday, here's an imprint and a drawing of the hundreds of thousands of slaves pulled from this area out of the Congo River heading into the Atlantic Ocean. Mia, you staying awake with the pictures today?
Yeah.
All right, excellent.
Oh, by the way, black in Portuguese is preto. Like presto, but without the S.
But it's French, which is why nobody really
Cares.
Like the French.
exactly. All right.
What are the French?
What's that?
What's French?
I don't know. Fries, I'm pretty sure, and toast. That's pretty much all I got. Yeah, fries and toast and bread. They have bread. It's like a baseball bat. You can play a game with it or eat it.
Baguette means like a stick.
Baguette,
Like
exactly.
Baguette magique. That's
Okay.
magic wand.
What does?
Baguette magique.
Means magic wands?
Yeah.
Is that what Harry Potter had?
Yeah.
In America, what policy do we have? The big stick policy. Come over here and we'll wrap you with it. They got baguette magique. I ordered that at a restaurant. Like, your ham and cheese on that? Fromage and bone? I don't know. fromage, jambon, baguette, s'il vous plaît. Yeah, I want my ham and cheese served on a plate. What the hell did you think I said? God. Is it hard? Cheese. Once again, speak American. All right, there we go. A little bit of comedy for the day. Now we're going to swing over around Africa, and we're going to go to East Africa, the Swahili part of it. And eventually, Prince Henry's boys, carrying on his school of navigation, will round the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. And when they do, is they sail around the Cape of Good Hope for two reasons. Number one, you hoped you make it and didn't die. And you hoped once you got over here, you got really rich. They sailed up the coast of Africa and they found out about the great Indian Ocean trade going on between the Muslim merchants in the Middle East, India, and Africa. And the famous Islamic ship, anybody remember what it's called? The Dow. We'll talk more about them during trade routes with the Latin sail. And the Portuguese say, hey, we want this area. We want to take it over. And everyone said, well, who are you? So the Portuguese used their advanced military technology to blow up Islamic trading ports around the city, and they briefly halt the Indian Ocean trade, and they leave a path of destruction. They are similar to the half-Turkish, half-Mongol Islamic warrior Tamerlane, he goes across South Asia, leaves a wake of pestilence, destruction, and death in his wake. That's what the Portuguese do. They drive the people inland, where the natives on the east coast of Africa run into interior African groups coming toward the coast, and a massive famine hit, so bad that some areas have not recovered to this very day. Way down in the south, way down in here, is an area in South Africa that hadn't really been touched by the slave trade, and that is the civilization of the Great Zimbabwe. They were gold traders. They also were excellent bronze and metal workers and great at stone carvings. And we have found Persian artifacts and Chinese porcelain in the Great Zimbabwe, and we found Zimbabwean artifacts in Iran and in China. We don't know if there was somehow direct trade between the two groups, but we found artifacts in both areas. The city-states of Zimbabwe, like the Mayas, like the Mali, like Greek, lived in these city-state things with, as you can see from this aerial view, a giant acropolis, 60-acre acropolis that housed the temples to the traditional gods and a granary, and then a larger set of city walls surrounding it where the wealthy lived and the farmers lived just outside of the last city wall. Very intricate grouping here. Here's part of the wall of the Great Zimbabwe. It is the biggest complex, and it has these grain silos with these beautifully carved rocks. Yes, ma'am?
Would that be like the Aztecs? Or was it the Aztecs? Who was it? The ones that like had all the people that traded in the middle of the city? And okay. Maybe I'm just dreaming that.
No. That the foreigners were allowed in, but only to a certain point. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you could come in here, but you could not. You couldn't really stay. We're going to limit your access. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Same thing with China in Canton. I just drew a mind blank for a minute. I'm sorry. I was totally Africa focused. My bad. These are still there to this very day. Matter of fact, didn't I let you guys hold a piece of this?
Probably.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, it came from that pile of rocks right there. It was given to me. I did not take it. Just gonna say. So anyway, South Africa. Is that you, Alexander?
No, that wasn't me.
All right. Inside.
It's Christina.
Yeah,
Really?
sorry.
Oh, it's Christina's Apple computer. South Africa. Very tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. The Dutch begin a settlement there in 1652. The Dutch were a very powerful merchant trading company for a short time, and they start the first trading corporation, the Dutch East India Company. And they build a settlement in what would become known as Cape Town as a supply depot. They would stop, they would pick up fresh water, fresh food, goats, cows, and salted for their trip around the Horn of Africa over to India. And they begin to trade with local inhabitants, peaceful herders known as Khoikhoi. Well, the Dutch set up a permanent outpost there, and after a while, Dutch ships pull into the harbor, and the sailors get off and say, you know what, I'm not getting back on. The weather is pretty and sunny here. Back in the Netherlands, it sucks. Amsterdam is a terrible city. So why am I going to get back on that ship with a bunch of dudes in like a locker room for months, in which I might die going around the Horn of Africa, so I'll stay here. And the colony gets bigger and bigger, and sooner or later the Dutch begin to settle, and they begin to build big farms. They become known as Afrikaners. And eventually, they dominate the area, pushing the Khoikhois out of their traditional land. The Khoikhois put up a rebellion. It is brutally and swiftly put down. And the Dutch take over. They will eventually force the Khoikhois to be hourly wage workers on their giant plantations. Eventually there will be a nasty war called the Boer Wars. Aren't you doing that one, Cameron? Isn't that you doing that? All right. The Boer Wars, where the British will eventually defeat the Dutch and take over the area. South Africa is known for gold work, wood carvings, their fables, and their folk tales. But it keeps getting worse because there's the Dutch and there's the Cape Colony. Now we've got to do this, my friends. Don't get dizzy. Yeah. We did that. Okay. The African proverbs that are created are some of the tales that we know, like we know the saying, once bitten, twice shy. While in Africa, they'll say, an animal once burned will never do it again. It's those Aesop fable-like tales that teach you a moral to the story. A story with a moral to it. Africa will be subject, we know, to mercantilism and the Columbian Exchange, another trade route. We know that due to the Spanish conquest of the New World and the killing, the genocide of the Native American workers, Africa is introduced into the slave trade. Africans are resistant to malaria, which helps in the equatorial climate of like the hot, humid Caribbean and Brazil and places like that. And Africans will be put to work farming and growing sugar, tobacco, cotton, rice, and indigo, cash crops. Things that you sell for a lot of money that you can't mechanize. You have to physically do it. So they play the key role in the Columbian Exchange. Slaves go from Africa to the Caribbean islands, where all the beaches and sandals resorts are now, to Brazil and to North America to harvest labor-intensive raw materials. So the Africans supplied the labor, the Americas supplied the raw materials, and Europe turned them all into finished products. The triangle trade, the Columbian Exchange, mercantilism fueled big business. There was so much money to be made, it will allow Europe to blossom into the age of absolutism. It's a transitional period. But while the Africans provided the labor, remember, all money was for the good of the Mother country. All right. So, is that my camera beeping? I don't know what that was. So, imperialism will play a role in Africa as well. This should be pretty fresh in your mind. As the Europeans seek to gain resources, you're only a truly powerful European country when you have more territory than your rivals. So if Christina gets one country, Spencer's going to get 3, so James is going to get 7, so Rachel's got to get 8, so Raquel's got to get 10. And in the end, you gobble up territory that's worthless just so you can have it, like the French taking over the Sahara Desert. Kaboom! So, when Belgium goes into the Congo River, King Leopold II of Belgium kicks off the Great Scramble for Colonies. So Otto von Bismarck holds the Berlin Conference, where the European countries simply carve up Africa for resources. The British choose the indirect control method by making every member of the British East India Company a servant of the Crown. You were not allowed to claim territory unless you had a governmental presence there. France chooses the direct control method, where they put a royal governor in an army detachment in every bit of land. Bless you. By the time they're done, only Liberia and Ethiopia are not taken over. Traditional African ways are destroyed. No African was invited to the Berlin Conference. But on the positive side, a Western educated African elite begins to grow, and they will use that to roll back and fight imperialism in decolonization. Yes, ma'am.
Why was Ethiopia
Because the Italians tried to take it twice and they lost both times, and it was a Christian-centered territory. So, you know, the Italians like, what do we do? The meat of all the mozzarella bullet has no effect. What do we do? Prego, grazie. So that was pretty much it. They tried really hard. It just didn't work. And that's going to be on YouTube, and I'll probably get in trouble for being comedic or insensitive, but it was supposed to be
Helpful.
and funny. And so you guys, it's a mnemonic. You can remember that. Decolonization will come as a result of the Cold War. What we're talking about today, World War II is over. Western Europe has just been devastated for the second time in 30 years by an expensive war. They cannot go back and invest in their colonies. So they just wipe their hands and walk away, leaving African countries without leadership, without industrial leadership. They are to survive on their own. And the United States and the Soviet Union will use them as pawns in the game of the Cold War. Africa is struggling. They need stable governments, and they need to modernize. England and France said, look, man, we're in bad shape. You can't become fully industrial economies and governments overnight. So we're going to try the slow but steady approach. We're going to coach you along. We're going to help you. We're going to get you there. And part of it's because England and France were so damaged themselves, and part of it is because